Hello, this is Community Unity Now, the D Tycoon Show. This is Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. I am Trudy Leong, Administrator of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. This is our very, very special guest, Gail Schechter. She is Executive Director of HOME, which is Housing Opportunities and Maintenance for the Elderly, but she is also running for Skokie Village Trustee at Large. Welcome, Gail.
So nice to have you. We've known you for so long. We've done so many things with you over at the Nathalie Selman House, over at Sheridan and Sherwin intersection.
Yes.
We've got so many stories and good times together, but now we're talking about the upcoming election.
Yes. So I, after 40 years of doing community organizing, tenant organizing work, living in Skokie for 20 years, I decided to throw my hat in the ring and run for trustee, which is similar to city council in Chicago. And that is hot off the heels of our big victory, our people's victory in electoral reform. So the village of Skokie residents have been very frustrated, I being among them, in having a village board that is not responsive to the people. So we've had a board that's really been handpicked by a party, the Social Caucus Party, for 60 years. Imagine, we've been a single-party town for 60 years with virtually uncontested elections. So we blew that out of the water. We sponsored 3 referendums that went to the voters in November of 2022, and those referendums won resoundingly. They were for nonpartisan elections, so everyone has an equal playing field. Anyone can run, anyone can get to the top of the ballot, as long as it's picked by lottery. Staggered terms, so not everybody's up at the same time. And then the third referendum is to address the issue of representation, because most of Skokie's trustees have lived in one part of town, the mostly sort of white, single-family, affluent part of town. Mm-hmm. So to remedy that, instead of 6 at-large trustees, we only have 2, or we will only have 2, and then 4, 1 from each district, so we have representation throughout the entire village.
2 questions, they're large questions. The power of a referendum, binding, non-binding, how it goes through, how it works. Question number 2 is also the segregation of Skokie. We see Skokie and we think certain things. Tell me about it.
Well, Skokie, what's actually interesting about Skokie is, unlike Evanston, and in my prior job before HOME, I was the executive director for 22 years of the organization now called Open Communities. It used to be called the Interfaith Housing Center of the Northern Suburbs, which is a fair and affordable housing advocacy group that covers 16 northern suburbs. So I had a chance to observe and work with residents in all these suburbs. Evanston has much more of a history of actual racially segregated neighborhoods. Skokie, not so much, although in Skokie, the first black homeowner wasn't able to buy their home until 1961. So, however, the black community, the Asian, Skokie is about a third, mostly South Asian, and the Latino community is pretty much scattered. However, because race and income correlate, lower income people who are disproportionately people of color live in the rental units, and rentals are sort of in certain parts of town, which are not the parts of town where the trustees have predominated.
And people who are running now, are there any Latinos or Asians?
Running, there are. There is an Asian American running for clerk. There is, I'm trying to think on the other, there are some for the trustees in some of the districts. Mm-hmm. Actually, we've got a really, it's the thing that proves our point about you open the electoral system up and you get a real diversity of people, not only by race. We also have blacks running for office, Asians running for office. people of different faiths, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. We also have diversity of thought, which we haven't had in the village board.
As for different parts of Skokie, different areas that, the rental area, and then there's the ownership areas, how are the resources spread amongst all of Skokie?
I'm glad that you asked that. I actually happen to live in one of those multifamily areas. I live in one of the few low-income census tracts. And I can tell you that people who live in the 4 flats in Skokie, these are buildings, it's a lot of the rental stock. It's not necessarily well kept, and my experience, I'm also the block captain on my block, so when I knock and go into all these 4 flats, I hear the little beeping for the smoke detectors where the battery is out. These conditions are not very good, and the village isn't doing a particularly good job of that kind of property standards enforcement on behalf of the renters. But in general, even in, other parts of Skokie, when we had the water main break last week, that was actually in the part of town that is, where the trustees tend to live. And those residents really felt, you could listen to what they said at the village board meeting. They were saying some of the same things that we're hearing lower income people of color saying, that, we felt ignored, we felt nobody cared. That's not to say that the village didn't care about them, but the fact was that nobody arrived on their blocks where, cars were encased in ice up to, the middle of a door for hours.
What made you want to run? Because what problems did you see that made you decide that you had to step up to try to get the job?
I have often thought about running in the village of Skokie, mainly because I have seen the village do things, take certain actions or try to take certain actions that were discriminatory. And I organized people to help them actually reverse course. So a big one was about 15 years ago or so when the village passed an ordinance. This is, an example of sort of a disparate impact of what you'd think was an innocent regulation. So they passed a parking ban on taxi cab drivers. They said you cannot park on a street or even in your driveway if it's not covered. Well, it turned out that at that time, most of Skokie's cab drivers were Pakistani Muslims, and their cab was their only car. And so if they couldn't park in the village, they either had to move or they had to quit their jobs. And at that time, they were very concerned. They were working with the Council of Islamic Organizations and the American Friends Service Committee. And I talked to HUD, to our, meaning at Open Communities, our enforcement contact, and he agreed with me. He said, hey, if there's an ordinance that prevents people, disproportionately people of legally protected classes by faith, by national origin, by race, from being able to live in the community, that is a violation of fair housing laws. So we organized, and we had a very good trustee at that time, and we got the village to reverse that. I also helped to get the village to reverse a group homes. They decided we have enough group homes in Skokie. We have more than anybody else. So they decided they wanted to have a moratorium on group homes. So we got that reversed. And so just time and again, seeing the village, whether they were intending to or not, heading into these pitfalls and not listening to their people. And fortunately, we were able to reverse some of that, but, I was seeing not only on housing issues, but other issues. And the one of the biggest, what blew this out of the water beyond housing was Carvana. Are you familiar with Carvana?
That's the car vending machine.
Yes. Carvana, big glass tower. And guess what? Carvana had approached the village of Skokie and said, hey, we want to put one of those up right in front of the Harms Woods, next door to the Holocaust Museum.
So this is a tower of cars in a glass, and they almost look like toy cars because they're from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there's an elevator, and you can purchase these cars online, I guess, or something. And it's a big. You can see this thing for miles.
Yes.
So this was an issue in Skokie.
Yes, this was an issue in Skokie 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago to the day, in February of 2022. And people who lived nearby, there's a high-rise nearby called Optima. People were against it, and cynically you'd say, oh well, they didn't want it because their view or something like that. But that was not necessarily the case. There were the Optima residents. There were people who cared about the economy because Carvana had a kind of questionable economic model. And then a lot of people who were concerned about birds because that is a huge migrating corridor for birds over Harms Woods. And it's not even just that it's glass, but you can see through it. So the birds would go right in. So you had every environmental group. I mean, there were like 20 groups that said, don't do this. You had residents. There was one resident who she has said it, I've talked to thousands of Skokie residents. Nobody said, let's do this. There was a 4-hour village board meeting. After all of that, the trustees, except for this one independent who managed to that's a whole other story, managed to get in, who was not part of the caucus slate, they all voted for Carvana. Mm-hmm. And people were so upset, and they saw, so it was like the whole village saw what other people have seen, like myself, for years, which is that you have a village board that doesn't feel accountable to the people. And so the only reason Carvana wasn't built is their economic model, really was bad. They lost their license, et cetera. So I decided to run because I know, having led the Skokie Alliance for Electoral Reform, I know what to do. I get things done.
And it seems like when you were working with the taxi cab drivers, you consulted HUD for that. You're consulting experts in the field. Mm-hmm. You're contacting members of the community, and then you're taking it. Yeah. For the positive change, or for the change that you want.
Yeah, the change that people feel is right. And even on the taxi cabs, there were a lot of residents. It was wonderful, the number of allies to these cab drivers, So, yes, and really, we have to admit when we don't have all the answers, and when we know somebody is doing something right, like, Skokie has been, right after the electoral reform, I started another campaign for affordable housing or mixed income housing in the village, prompted by Westfield announcing that they were going to tear down the old Bloomingdales and put up hundreds of units of luxury rental. And that was another last straw. It's like, you've been approving one luxury building after another. Westfield's going to do it. Where's a better place for workforce housing, or retirees, or just any kind of affordable housing? So the village did start a process of doing a housing policy, but to make a long and protracted story short, they didn't do anything in time for, we were trying to say, can you do this before Westfield puts in their plans? So when they said, it's too late, several of us just picked up the phone or wrote an email, wrote to Westfield. Can we sit down with you?
And then what happened?
And then what happened? We came and sat down with them at the mall. I got a real education about malls. In fact, I found out Westfield is one of the 2 most successful malls now in Illinois. And they listened to us. We had statistics about workforce. 3,200 people work at Westfield. It's the biggest employer in Skokie and the biggest sales tax generator and property tax generator. So they thought about it, they talked to others, and then that was like last March. in August, they contacted me and said, we want to talk to you again. And I'm like, and another person who's part of our group, I'm like, okay. So we went and talked to this vice president, and he said, we're going to do 3.5% affordable housing at the mall, which is, yes, it's very little, but they were going to do 0. And they said then to the Plan Commission, I was at that meeting, they said to the Plan Commission, if the village wants us to do more, we can, and this guy used the phrase, pull the levers to make it happen. And they didn't. I mean, and I said, look, Westfield is saying, sit at the table. And my other point here was that I also mentioned to Westfield that Highland Park has a great model of inclusionary housing. You can make the math work when you've got
the will
below.
Yeah.
And the will wasn't there.
From the village.
And why was the will not there?
A lot of it is that the village feels that they have enough affordable housing because the state puts out a list. It's sort of ironic because at Open Communities, I helped pass the law in Illinois that says the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act that says every community should have at least 10% affordable housing. 10% is not enough, but it was politically and Skokie has 20%. But of the 1,500 or so municipalities in Illinois, Skokie is in the top 6.5% most expensive in the whole state. So just because these numbers, and I've said till I'm blue in the face, the village, those numbers don't say anything about people paying more than they can afford in rent. For example, more than half of renters in Skokie are paying too much and are unstably housed. It doesn't say anything about whether people are adequately housed, because you may all those affordable units could well be 1 bedrooms. So you could have overcrowding. It doesn't say anything about the conditions of those homes. So it doesn't say anything but provide just a number. It's really more of a warning number to communities like a Winnetka or something that have way under 10%. So that's one thing. And then also I think there's a misunderstanding that affordable housing harms the economy, lowers property values, lowers tax revenue. And there are other studies that, again, I've sent to the village that show that affordable housing actually is economic development. When you have your employees living close to work, living near their families, living near where their children go to school.
They'll shop there and they'll...
And
there you
the
go.
dollars will recirculate at least 7 times within the community.
7 times is
at least 7 times. That's the number.
When you were doing your electoral reform, the Social Caucus slate, what was the pushback from them? And then evidently you were able to overcome any pushback from them.
Yeah, well, the Social Caucus Party was actually the only opponent to the electoral reform referendums. We got everybody supported. We even got support from some elected officials, from congregations, from all kinds of everywhere you can think of. Their concern was they were most concerned with the third referendum, the one that's a hybrid of at-large trustees and district trustees, because they were saying that they use the word balkanize, that this will balkanize Skokie, create divisions. They didn't understand that the districts they're not wards. We will still have the same government, still be one budget. It's just for representation purposes. It's making sure that every part of Skokie has representation. So I think the caucus party, of course, this is really this is also a threat to their power. They've been in power for so many years, and in fact, after the referendums won, they dissolved.
Oh, and
there's no longer a caucus party. They sort of reformulated something called the Skokie Community Caucus, which does not put forth a slate. But it's interesting because some of the incumbents and all, they're still sort of running together.
So running together in different positions, but they're still there trying to keep a position in another position.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And when you were putting together your platform and your referendum, did Pat Quinn help you? Because we heard a lot about the Pat Quinn helping with the writing referendum.
Yes, there's a funny story about that. So James Johnson, who is the one independent trustee, after he was elected, he's also a school teacher, he did some research, and he was the one who discovered that the fact that the same party's been in power all these years is actually baked into the system. You know, even I thought it was just, well, they just perpetuate themselves because they perpetuate themselves. So he had the idea of doing these referendums, and he was just sort of wondering where to start. And I knew, because some of my activism in Evanston, I helped to start something called Community Alliance for Better Government. I called a woman there who was part of the Evanston Voter Initiative. So they put something out for, you know, allowing for citizen referendums. And so I called that woman who was on my board with me at the CABG. And I said, how can I contact Pat Quinn? Because I knew he was helping Evanston Voter Initiative. She gave me his phone number. So I'm like, okay, I call him. And he picked up the phone. I guess I was not used to that, like a really accessible person. At that point, it was around November of 2021. And it was still, the pandemic happening. But there was a bit of a lull at that time. So, I asked him if he would help us. He said, I would be happy to come to a meeting. So we had our second meeting we didn't even have a name yet. I was sort of calling it in my emails, Democracy in Skokie. We had a lull in the pandemic so we could meet in person at the Skokie Public Library. He came, and people were so inspired, and he inspired us. He told us to do this, to keep going.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah, no, and he was there for us.
Mm-hmm. So besides helping you with the referendums, did he help with anything else? He's such a wealth of knowledge.
I'm not sure. There's another referendum on the ballot coming up, and it is for ranked choice voting.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And the same trustee that I mentioned, James Johnson, helped to get that going.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, that's what we're thinking about. Yes, definitely.
We've been discussing ranked choice voting quite a bit today on our various different meetings that we've been to. And we've been supporting ranked choice voting for quite a while through our friend Jim Garfield and the IVI-IPO. So look up ranked choice voting. We're almost done with the show. Look it up on Google, ranked choice voting. You'll be interested in that.
Yes. Yeah, Jim and Larry Garfield, they're they're leaders at the IVI-IPO, and that's what they support, and it's really, really helpful. And if our viewers want to learn more about your campaign, Gail, where should they go?
Oh, yes. If you're interested in my campaign, I'm Gail Schechter. My website is Gail for Skokie, so GAIL for FOR Skokie SKOKIE.com, and you'll read about me and my platform and my economic development philosophy and endorsements. And
can you say your name again and the website again, please?
Sure, Gail Schechter.
And please spell your name as
well. Sure. GAIL, and last name is SCHECHTER. And my website is gailforskokie.com.
And also, would it help if our viewers also visited your nonprofit Home's website as well?
Oh, yes. And just so you know, because I'm a nonprofit, so Home has nothing to do with my campaign.
There's a separation.
Home doesn't even serve Skokie. Home serves only the city of Chicago. So that's housing opportunities and maintenance for the elderly. We do intergenerational housing and services to help seniors stay in place, and it's homeseniors.org.
Well, thank you so much, Gail Schechter. This has been Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. I am Trudy Leong, Administrator of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gail, for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again next week.